The Wettest County in the World is a novel that is based around the story of three brothers and their actions in the late 1920s, early 1930s in Franklin County, Virginia, which was known then as the largest moonshine producing county, not only in the South, but also in the world. In 1935, there's a famous trial, the Great Franklin County Moonshine Conspiracy Trial in 1935, in which a large racketeering scheme essentially was put in place by the Commonwealth's attorney and some other men. At least they were accused of this. They were actually later acquitted, but it was a massive trial. It was the longest trial in Virginia history. And the three brothers had some role in this, and so basically what I did is I went in and looking at the court transcripts of the trial and also newspaper articles and sort of tried to trace the various movements of the brothers through the various incidents that occurred and create a dramatic narrative out of this. Now, what made it particularly compelling or interesting to me was that these three brothers are related to me. It's my grandfather and his two brothers. A big part of the research involved looking at the grand jury testimony. There's a book put together by a man named Keister Greer in Virginia, which would basically compiled all the grand jury testimony, and this allowed me to hear the voices of my grandfather and his brothers, as they're testifying. They were actually witnesses for the prosecution who were prosecuting the Commonwealth's attorney who had set up this big racketeering scheme. So they had to bring in all these moonshiners, people like my grandfather, to testify against the Commonwealth's attorney. He was acquitted, of course. He was a very popular, powerful man in Carter Lee in Virginia. And since most testimony against him was coming from criminals, he was not convicted, but pretty much most people believe that he had something to do with it. I wanted to use a character that was truly a fish out of water in the way that I felt, and so that's where the character Sherwood Anderson comes in, which was a very important part of the book. Sherwood Anderson, the great American writer, one of the most underappreciated American writers, really the person that taught Hemingway and Faulkner how to write. He was running some newspapers at this time. His career was already in great decline, and he went to Franklin County to write an article for Liberty magazine about the trial. And when I read that, I was already been teaching university literature classes for a long time, and I'm a huge fan of Sherwood Anderson. So when I uncovered that in these newspaper articles that Sherwood Anderson was actually there, in the same building with my grandfather and brothers, I just jumped at the opportunity. It's a really exciting thing, I think, for any fiction writer to try to reimagine the lives of real people to some degree, but also somebody that you really admire. And he's the one that came up with that sort of the term, the wettest county in the world. That's where the title derives from. No, I didn't think. I knew that some elements of the story were would play well, I guess, just because there's violence, and it's hard to say when you have a book that has plot and there's some violent episodes. But because of all the stuff with Sherwood Anderson and which and of course for the movie they cut him out entirely. I wasn't thinking about that at all. My first novel had been a moderate success and things, but film rights or something was not even on the radar really for this at all. Early on, Shia LaBeouf and John Hillcoat, the director, were what they call attached to it. They weren't. It didn't mean that they were going to do it or anything or whatever, but they liked it, they wanted it. Columbia bought the rights, and then somehow it went into what they call turnaround, which means somebody else bought it. So it got kind of confusing. Red Wagon Entertainment is now, was sort of now the principal mover. Sony Pictures is involved somehow. But Hillcoat and LaBeouf were the people that sort of always were there, and they obviously the reason why it's getting made at all is that they stuck with it. I mean, Shia LaBeouf really wanted to do the role of Jack. He wanted to do a serious, dramatic film, and it's an independent film. It's an indie, what they call an indie film, even though it has major Hollywood stars in it. So the rights were bought, and they were trying to put together this group of people, but it doesn't mean it's going to get made. Then Tom Hardy gets on board to play Forrest, and that sort of signaled a few things because he's a real up-and-coming actor. He's going to be in Batman and all this stuff. So Inception. He got good reviews for Inception, I guess, and he's a great actor. So when he gets on board, then that attracts Mia Wasikowska and Jessica Chastain, and then Gary Oldman and Guy Pearce, which is embarrassment of riches. All these are amazing people, and so then that gets the wheels rolling, and then it's into development, and they're making it. And that process happened pretty quickly over a year. They shot for it was only like 8 weeks, 12 weeks or something in Georgia. The script, by Nick Cave is I'm a fan of his work. I think it's really good. He retained a lot of, I'm proud of the fact that he retained a lot of things directly from the book. He retained a lot of lines, dialogue, scenes, like all the important scenes in the book are in it, except for the stuff with Sherwood Anderson, which they did cut out the Sherwood Anderson part. Understandable, for a movie, it's a different kind of animal. It's not my book. It's a different project. There are changes in the script. There are things that Nick Cave added in, and it's the stuff that always happens with book to film. It's shortened and amplified. So the violence is even more ramped up, and huge things are chopped out, and so it's an exciting thing to happen, but it also feels like something very much outside of me, and I feel like it's something that's kind of based on my book, but I don't see it as the same thing, But regardless, I'm happy that it's happening, and I'm hoping I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty good film, and I'm excited to see it, And it's going to be, it'll be a pretty bizarre thing because they're using the same names and everything. So, my grandfather, and he's going to be up there and on screen, and it's very. I often think about what if my grandfather and grandmother were alive, what would they think of Shia LaBeouf and Mia Wasikowska playing them on the, it's a very surreal experience.